Have you ever done something that completely contradicted everything you believed about yourself? Not a small compromise, not a moment of weakness you can easily dismiss, but something so far from the person you thought you were that afterward you couldn't fully explain it, not even to yourself. Psychology tells us this isn't rare. It isn't even unusual. In fact, the human mind has an extraordinary capacity to hold two completely opposing truths at the same time, and to find ways, subtle and sophisticated ways, to make the contradiction feel rational, feel necessary, feel somehow like the right thing to do. This is the story of a man who walked alongside greatness for 3 years, who believed, who served, who, by all accounts, was trusted, and who, in a single act that took less than a minute, became the most infamous name in human history. His name was Judas Iscariot, and before it became a synonym for betrayal, it was simply the name of a man chosen deliberately, out of hundreds, possibly thousands, who followed the same teacher. Judas wasn't pulled from the crowd by accident. He was selected, trusted, and given a specific role: keeper of the group's finances, the practical one, the one who handled the real-world details while others contemplated the spiritual. He walked the same roads, heard the same teachings, witnessed the same miracles, shared the same meals. For 3 years, Judas Iscariot was an insider, one of 12, part of the inner circle of arguably the most significant movement in human history. And then, for 30 pieces of silver, a modest sum, roughly equivalent to a month's wages, he led soldiers to a garden and identified his teacher with a kiss. The betrayal itself was almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. What makes it psychologically extraordinary is everything that came before it, and everything that happened immediately after. Because within hours of the arrest, Judas returned the silver, declared the man he had handed over to be innocent, and then, unable to live with what he had done, took his own life. This is not the behavior of a man without conscience. This is the behavior of a man destroyed by one. In 1957, the social psychologist Leon Festinger introduced a concept that would permanently change how we understand human decision-making. He called it cognitive dissonance. The theory is deceptively simple. When a person holds two conflicting beliefs, or when their actions contradict their values, the mind experiences genuine psychological discomfort, almost like a mental alarm. And because that discomfort is unbearable, the mind does something remarkable. It doesn't always change the behavior. Instead, it changes the story. It rationalizes. It reframes. It finds reasons why the contradiction isn't really a contradiction, why the action that seemed wrong was actually necessary, justified, even virtuous. The greater the conflict between belief and behavior, the more elaborate the rationalization must become. Judas was a man whose entire identity was wrapped up in a cause he believed in, a movement he had dedicated years of his life to. For him to betray that cause, his mind would have needed to construct a narrative powerful enough to override 3 years of loyalty, conviction, and relationship. What was that narrative? What did Judas tell himself in the hours before he walked to the chief priests? That is the question cognitive dissonance asks. And the answer it offers is both illuminating and deeply unsettling. To understand Judas, you have to understand what he expected. Most scholars and psychologists who study this period agree on one key detail. The disciples, including Judas, anticipated a different kind of revolution. A political one, a restoration of power, of national identity, of visible, tangible change in the world they could see and touch. 3 years in, that revolution had not arrived. The movement was powerful in its message, but fragile in its structure. The authorities were closing in. The momentum was stalling in ways that pragmatic, finance-minded Judas would have noticed more acutely than most. This is the cognitive dissonance trigger, the gap between expectation and reality. In psychological terms, Judas was experiencing what Festinger would call a disconfirmation event, a moment when the evidence stops matching the belief. And when belief is identity, disconfirmation doesn't just challenge the idea, it threatens the self. The mind then faces a choice: revise the belief or find a way to force reality to conform to it. Judas, it appears, chose the latter. His betrayal may not have been an act of abandonment at all. It may have been, in his own internal logic, an act of acceleration, forcing a confrontation that he believed would finally trigger the revolution he had been waiting for. This is the first and most disturbing insight cognitive dissonance offers us about Judas. He may have genuinely believed he was helping. Once the rationalizing mind builds its first justification, something predictable happens. It doesn't stop there. In Big Five personality terms, individuals high in conscientiousness, the trait associated with goal orientation, planning, and a need for outcomes, are paradoxically among the most vulnerable to this pattern. Because they don't act impulsively, they think, they plan. And the more they think, the more elaborate and internally coherent their justifications become. Judas was meticulous. He was trusted with money. He was the practical architect of the group's daily operations. That kind of mind doesn't make spontaneous decisions, which means the betrayal didn't happen in a moment of passion. It was constructed step by step inside a mind that was very good at making things make sense. Psychologists call this motivated reasoning, the process by which the conclusion is decided first and the logic is built backwards to support it. We don't reason our way to a decision. We decide, and then we reason our way into feeling certain we were right. Judas decided something. We don't know exactly when, but from that point, every conversation, every doubt, every alternative reading of events was filtered through the conclusion he had already reached. The mind, once committed, is extraordinarily good at seeing only what confirms what it has already chosen to believe. There is a detail in the narrative that psychology finds impossible to ignore. Judas didn't disappear after the betrayal. He didn't take the money and leave. He watched what happened next. He saw the arrest. He witnessed where his action led. And something broke. In Festinger's framework, this is called dissonance collapse. The moment when the rationalization can no longer hold the weight of reality. When what you told yourself no longer fits what you are watching unfold in front of you. Judas had constructed a story in which his action would lead somewhere specific, where his betrayal would serve a larger purpose he could live with, perhaps even feel proud of. That story did not survive contact with the actual consequences. He returned the 30 pieces of silver, a deeply symbolic gesture. Not an attempt to undo what was done, which he knew was impossible, but a psychological act of disavowal, a desperate attempt to separate himself from the decision his own mind had built. "I have sinned," the text records him saying. "I have betrayed innocent blood." This is not the language of strategy. This is the language of a man whose internal narrative has shattered, leaving him with nothing between himself and the full weight of what he had done. The cognitive dissonance that had quietly powered his decision for weeks or months was gone. And what remained, without any protective story to hold it back, was unbearable. What happens to a person when the story they told themselves completely fails? In clinical psychology, the disintegration of a core self-narrative, the story a person tells about who they are and why they do what they do, is one of the most psychologically destabilizing experiences a human being can face. Identity is not just a sense of self. It is a structural framework that makes experience livable. When it collapses, the person is not left with clarity. They are left with a kind of free fall. Judas had built his identity around a cause. He had rationalized his most extreme act as an extension of that cause. And when the rationalization failed, he was left without an identity that could survive what he now knew about himself. Peter betrayed Jesus the same night, 3 times, publicly. And Peter rebuilt. He grieved, he returned, he went on to become the foundation of something significant. The psychological difference between them is not the act. It is what came after. Peter's self-concept, while shaken, had enough flexibility to absorb the failure without complete collapse. He could hold the contradiction. I did this, and I am still someone who can go forward. Judas, it appears, could not. The cognitive dissonance that had once protected him had left him with no capacity for the kind of self-compassion required to survive one's own worst moment. And that may be the most tragic psychological insight this story offers. You don't need to be standing in a first-century garden to recognize this pattern. Think of the political operative who genuinely entered public service to do good, and who years later finds themselves defending decisions they would have condemned in someone else a decade ago. The rationalization didn't arrive all at once. It was built piece by piece, each small justification making the next one slightly easier to construct. Or consider the person in a relationship who knows, quietly and with increasing certainty, that something is wrong, but who continues investing time, energy, and identity into it, because the alternative is to admit that the story they told themselves about this person, this relationship, this choice, was flawed from the beginning. The discomfort of admitting the dissonance feels more threatening than living inside it. Or the professional who has staked their reputation on a particular vision or strategy, and who, when the evidence turns against it, doesn't revise their position. They defend it more intensely. Because to admit the error isn't just to be wrong about the decision, it is to be wrong about themselves. Cognitive dissonance is not a character flaw. It is a feature of the human mind, a defense mechanism that exists because psychological consistency is necessary for function. We cannot constantly hold open every contradictory possibility about ourselves and still act. But it becomes dangerous precisely when we stop noticing it's operating. The most sophisticated rationalizations are always the ones we cannot see as rationalizations at all. To us, they simply feel like thinking clearly. The story of Judas has been interpreted as a story about greed, about fate, about evil, about free will. But psychology offers a quieter, more uncomfortable reading. It is a story about a mind doing exactly what minds do, protecting a person from the unbearable discomfort of internal contradiction. Building a story, making the unthinkable feel logical. And then, when the story finally fails, leaving that person completely unequipped for what comes next. We remember Judas as the betrayer, but the deepest question his story asks is not, how could he do that? It is, what story had he told himself, for how long, that made it feel, in some part of his mind, like the right thing to do? Because that question is not ancient. It is not about someone else. It is the question that lives quietly inside every decision we make that we'd rather not examine too closely. The story of Judas endures not because it is a story about treachery. It endures because it is a story about the stories we tell ourselves and the cost of believing them. If this kind of psychological storytelling stays with you, if you found yourself somewhere inside this analysis, subscribe. Because every week, we go deeper into the minds that shaped the ancient world and what they still reveal about ours. Like this video if it challenged how you see this story. And leave a comment below. Have you ever caught yourself rationalizing something you knew, somewhere, wasn't right?